my boots on and lace them up. A hard work, not another day to work. A hard work, that's what they say. Hard work.
Thank you everyone for having me come today. It's a great honor to speak to librarians. Usually scientists only get to speak to scientists. And I think of librarians as silent partners for science. Without librarians, we couldn't do our job, right? There's no way that we would ever get to the literature, which is the most essential feature for starting to do research. So one of the things that I'm hopeful for in the long term is that you're not silent partners anymore from my perspective. We're much more active partners. And I think the recent changes at NSF and at NIH promoting our effort to save our data will encourage us to be closer working partners. It happens in some scientific disciplines, like in big projects like big physics projects or oceanography more. There are people where you have a more and more specialized role. So as a scientist, as an oceanographer, I would never get to drive the boat or steer the boat, right? I wouldn't get to run the winch anymore. There would be specialized people, and there are more specialized people. We would call them sometimes data managers, but they're really doing a lot of the kinds of things that librarians do, or curators in some ways. And so in big projects, they're more specialized roles, and the kind of science that I was trained in, I had to do everything. And one thing I did very badly was take care of my data. And I know that now, but I didn't know that. I wasn't trained. So you can see here's a young second grader, and she's starting to be trained very well because she has a nice data form. Usually they don't do that in second grade, but that's what you need to do. You need to start giving people structure. The success is always giving people structure, right? And you know that because you have to deal with that every day. And as opposed to scientists, you know what metadata are. That's something you live and breathe. Okay, so I'm just going to run through a series of ideas about citizen science. And please stop me at any time. It's, as someone who's been learning about how people learn, you know, it's great. You get this job. You kind of win the lottery, right? You get to be a professor. You win the lottery. They hire you, and you get tenure and blah. And then they say teach, and what do? You teach the way you were taught, right? That's the natural thing to do. But then somebody comes and sort of knock, knock, knock. You know, you can study how people learn. And if you do that, you might find out that lecturing might not be the way to do it. Oh, lecturing is not the way to teach? Oh, but I was never taught how to teach. Oh, but you're a teacher. So, you know, it's different if you're in high school or elementary school, but as a professor, we're still sort of just teaching as we were taught, unless we're starting to do active research and learning. And one of the things we do know now is that lecturing is not the way to go, right? I shouldn't be lecturing. It should be a dialogue. It should be some other thing. So stop me. I'll give you some examples, and I'd like to turn it into as much of a conversation. And so questions, ideas? I was going to say a couple more things about my background to help you. I was an undergraduate at Tufts, where I got a degree in engineering and in my own program of study called systems ecology. I then went off to the University of Washington, where I was a graduate student in fisheries, forestry, and wildlife. And then I got another individual degree in biophysical ecology. So I've always sort of been in the middle a little bit. I went off to do a fellowship, Humboldt Fellowship in Germany for a year and a half. That was really exciting. It was exciting for a guy who grew up in Vermont and then traveled a little bit to go overseas a little bit more. That was very exciting to see Europe. And then I had another postdoc that took me from California to Rutgers to Cambridge, where John Girton was in zoology department. He earlier showed a picture of John Girton, the Nobel Prize winner. As academics, as you know, we get to move around and travel, and you get to see different cultures, and that's really helps us be better scientists and understand different cultures. At UMass Boston, where I've been for 25 years, the most time I've spent away from UMass Boston was actually doing research in Costa Rica, in a place called Monteverde, which is a famous tourist destination, which is a really very nice place to go. We were studying butterflies and plants and making electronic field guides. So that's a little bit about my background. All right, I got involved in citizen science when I was helping teach a class, and it was for teachers, to try to get teachers to take their students outside, because I feel this very strong connection to the natural world. It's the thing that supports us, right? Who here has heard the term ecosystem services? Has anybody ever heard the term ecosystem services? Can anybody name me an ecosystem service? All right, I'll stop and do my one very important idea for you. This is if you don't remember anything about this, remember this one idea about ecosystem services, okay? So without ecosystem services, that's it for us. Without, humanity's done, right? Because it's all the things that we need that the environment does that we don't pay for. And a good example would be water, okay? Water. So imagine you were born, right, and you got 1,000 gallons of water. And they said, this is your gift, 1,000 gallons of water, it's yours. And you would say, fantastic, I got water, right? And I would start to use it. I would drink it, I would cook with it, I would use it maybe to take away some waste and so on. But at the end of the day, flush whatever, it's gone, right? And then you'd be out of water, and you'd say, well, I need some more. And they'd say, well, oh, you're unlucky, we collected it all for you. And you'd say, well, I don't want that water, that's all dirty water. Right? That's no good to me. I want clean water. So I'd say, well, you can run it through the sewage treatment plant and clean it up. And you'd say, oh, that's good, sure. And then I'd say, well, would you drink the water coming out of the sewage treatment plant? Who here would drink water coming out of a sewage treatment plant? Anybody?
We all do. Yeah.
No, you don't. Nobody has their input right from the water coming out of a sewage treatment plant. Not a chance do you do that. Not a chance do you do that. It's not clean enough. It's a lot cleaner than it used to be, right? But it's not nearly clean enough. And it's that last little bit that's really expensive to do. Very expensive, right? Who does that? The environment does that for you. How much is it? How much do you pay? Nothing. It's not in any economic model, right? That's what the environment does for you. So my big concern is there's a little bit too many people who want a little bit too much and not enough environment to do it. That's what I think about every day. That's the problem. So if you want to think about air, clean air, if you want to think about soil that grows your food, we can make a long list, but it's always the same case as with water. Okay, so there's my advertisement, my science advertisement for you. Okay, so turning to these citizen science projects, what's happened with the technology of the web, people have gotten excited from several perspectives, from working with communities, from the point of view of education, from being greedy scientists of trying to solve problems and get data. So there are many perspectives that have come together to create what has been termed citizen science. There are other terms that people use. So it's just a new discipline that's forming. There is now an association, the Citizen Science called Alliance, that's just been formed. It'll have its first official meeting in February, just before the AAAS meeting. It has 2,000 members. It has a journal on the way. So it's really coalesced. This happened based on a meeting 2 years ago, just before the Ecological Society of America meeting in Portland. And there are more than one community here. It's very heterogeneous. The geographers have a whole lot of work they're doing in this area. OpenStreetMap, I think, has 800,000 volunteers. It's amazing, right? Amazing. And it's in medicine, right? It's everywhere. People are trying to get communities to work together. I am really going to show you much more about environmental stuff, and even narrower, more narrow niche, and that's about biodiversity, because that's what I know a lot about as a biologist. So one of the examples is called Project Feeder Watch. Has anybody ever heard of Project Feeder Watch? Has anybody here ever participated in a citizen science project? Oh, wow. You're very community-minded, except I should know that about librarians. By definition, they're community-oriented. So congratulations, then thank you. This is one that comes from the Laboratory of Ornithology, which has been the epicenter of citizen science. Rick Bonney there has really spearheaded this idea, so much so now that he's expanding behind birds, and they're going to have to kick him out because they're so focused on birds there. That's one. Here's another one. This is one of the first one, ClickWorks, which was to identify craters. Anybody ever heard of this one? Here's another one. This is the Natural History Museum in London. They have iSpot, opal surveys. They did a ton of work there. Here's a toolkit about how you can do this stuff at Citizen Science. That's being revised, so how you do that is being changed as we talk. Here's one that I worked on. I count fish with my friends for the Parker River Clean Water Association. We have no money for this. We have 20 people a year who do it, maybe. Here's a fish. I don't know, you can't see that fish very well. Can you see this fish? Yeah. People have heard of alewife. Has anybody ever had an alewife to eat? It was very important for us for a long time in Massachusetts.
I've been to alewife.
You've been to alewife, right? There's lots of alewife brooks, right? It was a rite of spring. When these fish arrived, it provided an easy source of protein. It was a great thing. Anyway, there's a dam built in the 1630s on the Parker River because they wanted to mill things, right? Fish can't go up that, so they come under this rusty old bridge. They go up this ladder, and at the top there's a little counting board. See this whiteboard? When they go over that, you can see them. So people volunteer, they go, and they count for 10 minutes. And from that, you can extrapolate and try to get an estimate of how many fish there are. First thing you do is count for 10 minutes, and you multiply by 6, and you get an estimate for the hour, right? And then if people aren't there, you try to extrapolate between hours. It's a very simple idea. There are some counters. They're taking a temperature measurement. So here's the kind of thing. We have a training. We start checking. Amy helps coordinate the schedule. Maybe 20 people. We get 160 counts. That's it. Ranges for 2 months maybe. And we use Google Docs. So you should be interested in data management, right? I tried paper first. I tried to get some people to build a website. I tried email. I tried lots of things. Google Docs has worked the best. I have to open it up. You have to leave it totally open. But people aren't corrupting it or anything like that. It's okay, right? So it's just Google Docs. Sorry. And here's some data from this year. That's the daily run estimate, the number of fish I saw, I estimate were there for the day. And you can see there's a lot of zeros. So all these days are zeros. There's nothing happening, right? But people have gone and looked. It's very important to get a zero. Nothing's happening. And we've expanded this idea. We can go to the bottom and see if there are any fish there that look like they might be running up. So we've gotten smarter over the years. And here's what's happened over a number of years since we started. Yeah, so this is not very encouraging, especially even these first counts were very encouraging because in the 1970s there were an average of about 20,000 fish coming. This was so bad in here that the federal government considered listing them as endangered species, which is something the government never wants to do. It has too many implications cost-wise. So they considered it and they rejected it. But things popped up a little bit here. But it's not anywhere near the health it once was, right? Okay, so results. I could talk about that, but we don't. It's more important to go to the next thing. Close to harvesting. It used to be very important. All right, another example. First, so it's community-based. You get local people to understand a local context. It's an incredible opportunity just to talk to people when you're doing something. What are you doing? Why are you doing that? It just has a big impact just by doing it. Just by telling people what you're doing has an incredible impact. And it solves a problem for scientists. There are not enough scientists to get this done. So I want to introduce you to this idea of citizen science as a new kind of instrument. Think of it as a new kind of instrument. And we're just learning how to build it. And we certainly don't know how to calibrate it yet. Think of it as a new kind of instrument, and we're just figuring out how to calibrate it. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the calibration, trying to figure out data quality. Okay? All right, some more examples maybe. Okay, so here's the granddaddy for us. Everybody who loves citizen science always looks at eBird and goes, if I could only be as good as eBird. Why? Well, eBird is 10 years old, and it's the single largest contributor to the Global Biodiversity Information Facility in Denmark. The Global Biodiversity Information Facility, GBIF, is the place where serves as the central repository for people to put their metadata about biodiversity data. And they're up to about 400 million records now, which is not a lot by biological standards, but it is for biodiversity a lot. The US government NSF is now funding a project called iDigBio, which is supposed to get all the data in US museums digitized. iDigBio, that's supposed to get 1 billion records. You know, all the historical records that have been there. But eBird has already got 100 million observations in GBIF. So everybody looks at it and goes, wow, it's the single most largest contributor to GBIF already. And let's see, here's what's happening with it. This is 2003. They released the second version right here, and then it started to grow, right? And you can see it's very pulsed. This is the beginning of the year when people go out and bird. Up there, that highest point reads 5 million observations a month. Now, the data here follow the 90-10 rule, right? 10% of the people put in 90% of the data. But still, there's an awful lot of people. This is the number of checklists. This is times 100,000, right? So it's 10 to 20 times, 10 to 20 species per checklist that go in. If you get interested in this, you should go to the website. There's a lot happening. What's amazing is they're doing it with 8 full-time people. Yes, ma'am?
Just to repeat something, what percentage of people did you say are bringing the data in?
10% of the people bring in 90% of the data. That's a very common rule in all citizen science and many kind of activities. You know, a small percentage contribute a lot. Sometimes they call it the 20-80 rule, but it's 90-10 rule. Okay? And what has this done? It started out as an education project, and what it did is it took a different perspective. It said, there are a lot of people who like to bird. We're going to build a tool that is the best way to keep track of what you're doing. And by the way, is it all right if we use your data? Okay. So birding, for a lot of people, is competitive. And if I build the best tool, then you finally capitulate and you say, I'm just going to use eBird because I can do more with it than anything else. And that's essentially what they've accomplished. And now they're So if you talk to a programmer, they're not really a programmer, they're a birder. I can't hire programmers like that, right? I just get a programmer. I don't get somebody who loves their domain to the extent that they're a world-class birder, perhaps, right? So they're such a magnet, they get that. Anyway, there are over 500 people who volunteer their time to review the records. So they've leveraged this passion for birding that existed to make this work. Other biodiversity areas can't quite do that. There's a group of people who love butterflies and dragonflies and you know, you can do other vertebrates and other groups, but nothing probably like birds, because they've been doing this for 100 years, since the Christmas bird count, right? It's 100 years old. But it's telling us incredible things. They're doing incredibly good science. I could talk for the rest of the time about that, just the cool things in eBird. But I want to show you other things. I want to skip over that, talk about data quality. A lot of the problem with citizen science is that scientists say these data aren't any good. They don't have their union card. He has his union card. You got your union card, right? You got the degree. You know what science is. Do you have your union card?
Yeah.
Yeah. How about you? Do you have your union card? You probably all do. You probably got a master's degree. You probably know what information science is. You probably know about data. But a citizen? No way. No union card. So the obligation is on the builders of this new instrument to be able to document data quality. And we're just thinking about that and learning how to do it. Okay? And there are lots of techniques. Scientists have wonderful techniques. And I can talk a lot more about that if people care. But there's lots and lots of ways to ensure data quality, and we're working on it. Here's an example from another project that I showed you earlier, Feeder Watch. And they're getting confirmed reports. You know, they're talking to people after they find something that's not so good. You get a flagged report. And so they write them a letter. You know, you saw such and such an observation. Tell me some more. Tell me more, right? I want data. I want my decision based on data. I'm cool. I'm smart. Show me your data. Show me the data, right? So often in our culture, it's about the relationship and not the data, right? In fact, establishing the personal relationship, as we heard earlier, is really the first step. But a lot of science is not based on personal relationships. It has to be based on data, right? Science is only one way of knowing. There are lots of ways of knowing. I think on the materials, there's a nice site at Berkeley that talks about science and how it works. You know, you often see in the textbooks it's a nice linear process. It's not like that at all. It's a very complex process. We're not teaching students that enough yet, but everybody who practices science knows that. All right, so they see this bird and they want to know more, and so they can check. And this is what happened. Confirmed reports 33, rejected correct report, no response, invalid email. So what do you want from volunteers? This is pretty good, right? And you have some way to check the quality of the data. Now, there are many other ways and many other things you can do, but this is one step where people are actively trying to check. One of the things that's really difficult in this particular situation is the fact that if you get an unusual sighting and it's true, that's really neat, because it's a new record for a state maybe, or a new record in a county. That's really cool. That's going to help us figure out if there's climate change or not, right? So the rare thing you really want to know about, you really want to confirm it, but on the other hand, it's likely that it's an amateur and they're just a screw-up. So it's a tough situation to be in, but we're thinking about learning how to deal with it. Here's 3 birds, right? They kind of looked alike. You could confuse those if you didn't know what you were doing. So you have to check sometimes. What?
I think I've confused those at my own feeder.
Well, and male and female. I mean, it's confusing. It's not even the professionals have a hard time. Here's another thing that's really important: sensitive information. That's something you folks know a lot about. Some things you can't share openly. We have that with our turtle project. We worked on an endangered species of turtles called Blanding's turtles, right? People want to come and dig up the eggs because they can sell them for $5 grand. So it's problematic sometimes. All right, onward. Okay, so one last idea. Can we use this approach in education? Why would I want to do this? Why would I want to actually have my students do this? Well, bird people are passionate. I started plants because it was easier taxonomy. I had to overcome this idea of plant blindness, right? The world's green. That's all. It's just green mass out there. Nobody cares about plants, right? Maybe a flower, but not a plant. Maybe collect some vouchers. That might help. But here's the crux of it. This is Alison Gopnik. Do people know Alison Gopnik? Her brother writes for The New Yorker. In fact, imagine if we taught baseball the way we teach science. Until they were 12, students would read about baseball technique and occasionally hear inspirational stories of the great baseball players. Right? Undergraduates might be allowed under strict supervision to reproduce historic games. But only in graduate school would they, at last, actually get to play the game. Who here has actually ever done science? What a well-educated bunch, right? So few people get to do science. They have no idea. You alluded to this in your talk, right? A procedure? Oh, yeah. They've just read about it in textbooks forever. It's not the way to teach science. We should start in first grade. We can do it in first grade. If I had time, I'd show you a whole wonderful example of students finding feathers, second graders, and all the work they did to find out what feathers those birds belong to. You can do it in second grade, and we should. All right. Details about how we did this, not so important. But here's what I started to do with a notebook. Just had a simple field notebook. They had to write down their site description, where they were at. They had to, don't crash now, you crashed. What did I do?
That little blue arrow in the lower left. There you go.
That's because it's sitting there?
No, click on it, just happens. There you go.
There's some more data, good. Here's an actual specimen, right? Somebody actually collected a specimen, and if you zoom in on that, you can start to see a lot of stuff, details. You could tell what it is. However, there's sometimes people give photographs. That's a lot of work. Sometimes people would turn in that. That's a photograph. You can't get a passing grade for that, can you? That was done at the last minute, late at night.
Yeah.
These are non-majors trying to slide by, right? I passed in something, come on. All right. So students are a different kind of citizen science. They need to match the reward system for getting a good grade with getting accurate data. I need to spend more time teaching them how to ID games and teams approaches. I need to get better tools. Whoa. Whoa. Did I do that? So what I've done is come to an iNaturalist. Who here has heard of iNaturalist? Anybody heard of iNaturalist? Look up iNaturalist. It has ways to do any kind of biodiversity you want in the whole world. It's really cool. Runs on your iPhone, your cell phone. It's free. You can start your own project. So I started my own project with these students. And this is a much better way because the phone gives me the location and the time and a picture. And it works really well. It's really well made. So technology can help us out. Now I've got to work harder on the teaching side to engage them, make it more fun, make them more involved in actually doing science. Here's what the front page looks like. It just looks fun. To iNaturalist. Okay. All right, the rest of the time, I want to talk about data management and Data One with you. Any questions about citizen science or ideas you have you're wondering about? Yes?
How do you attract other people to your effort?
So has anybody heard of Galaxy Zoo? Galaxy Zoo was started because the graduate student identified 50,000 galaxies in 1 month and then quit. Right? It was too much work. And so they built a website, and they said, well, we'll just have the public try it out. And after doing this, they got 100,000 volunteers or something in a very short period of time. They just put it on the internet, and people found it. So it turns out they did some calculations. There's a lot of free time people are wasting. They're doing nothing They're bored. And so if you can connect with them and show them something they might be interested in, and you make it in a way that they can be engaged. If you understand something about human-computer interfaces, you understand something about people, it means you're probably not a scientist, right? I mean, there are some exceptions, but I'm probably not one of them. Then you can start to really engage people, and they come out of the woodwork and help you.
So has that worked for you? Do you have a success story?
I think the fish project is amazing because it's been going 18 years. And the state always asks me for the data. It's very interesting. The state always comes and wants our data. They never show me what they get, though. I think the Department of Marine Fisheries is a little bit browbeaten by other people because they won't share the data with me. But 18 years, and it's the only thing they have. They don't have anything else, right? So the thing about citizen science and a new instrument is it usually gets data that nobody else can get. So yeah, go ahead.
Well, I actually have two questions, and one gets at that. So the projects that we've seen actually operate in a fairly narrow range of what we consider science broadly. We're talking about observational natural sciences here. So these are things that happen in the macro scale that you can observe with the naked eye, mostly. How do we engage citizens in projects in molecular biology or chemistry or things that do not involve going out and observing the natural world?
So citizen science is not going to be a panacea for science. It's not that. If you can find the right contact in any discipline, you can get people engaged. So it's working really well in astronomy. You can go to the internet right now, go to Google Scholar and type in Galaxy Zoo, and you'll see papers published that depend on the data sets that they generated. In chemistry, there's the most famous example is called FoldIt. Has anybody heard of FoldIt?
Yeah.
FoldIt's pretty amazing, right? And that's kind of a very different kind of thing because it's not data. People are creating new ways that proteins fold and trying to understand how that works. It's also happening in a broader sense. The guys, I can't think of the author's name. It's Rediscovering Science is the reference. It's Michael, not Shermer. I'm blanking. Anyway, in that book, Rediscovering Science, he makes a very strong case for just much more interaction among scientific groups, sort of a crowdsourcing approach. So I think there's an opening up now that can happen. He gives examples from mathematics. Who would have thought that group projects in mathematics would work? They can. Think about Wikipedia. Who would have thought Wikipedia would work? I certainly wouldn't have. I wouldn't have bet money on that. But we know they tried the academics, and the academics totally failed. They wouldn't do it. Wikipedia is the result of the academic community failing. But I send my students to Wikipedia. I go to Wikipedia every day. So I think the task that you have to engage people in has to be matched. What you can see is if you get a big enough group, as they get more and more experience, they start to behave more and more like real scientists. In Galaxy Zoo, they discovered new categories of galaxies. The most passionate, well, in birding, I don't know if people know this, but the best birders are not academics. They spend all their time inside on gels, right, or doing DNA work, or they're not outside. The very best birders are actually people who are just so passionate they can't avoid going out. Or once in a while, somebody like David Sibley who becomes a millionaire because he can paint and write and see birds. Yeah.
There's also a tool for, and I don't know if some of you may have played it, called Eterna, and I just tweeted it on the conference hashtag along with Foldit, so you have those links. Eterna is a different thing than Foldit, but it's along the same lines, and the user community in solving RNA structures, and they're addictive little puzzles, they've actually come up with some really useful, some really interesting solutions. So it's crowdsourcing solutions for molecular problems. But again, some problems are solvable that way, and some problems just don't lend themselves.
I think the important thing to keep in mind is what we're actually doing when we're engaging people in science here.
Yeah.
Because what we're really doing is crowdsourcing observation and computational power that is a little bit beyond what we can do purely with technology. I think the baseball analogy is a little bit deceiving. What we're really doing with citizen science is saying, if you want to learn about chess, okay, we're going to let you move the pieces around, but we're not actually teaching you necessarily how to make the moves. I'm not saying that's bad, but because that's a level of engagement that's still a step beyond recreating classic games. And that probably leads more to wanting to then get your union card and learn how to be somebody who's moving the pieces around. But I think it's good to keep in mind sort of what the actual scope is of the thing that we're doing with citizen engagement in terms of they're not generating hypotheses, they're not really analyzing, in a lot of cases they're not really analyzing results. They're at the data collection and maybe a little bit of processing stage.
You know what? At the same time, I know you said like only slightly beyond our processing capabilities. A lot of these are human categorization tasks, like the hits that Amazon's Mechanical Turk has people do for pennies on the dollar. And so I think that there's always going to be ways in which human beings' discernment is going to stay ahead of artificial intelligence, harking back to Wednesday's conversation, for a while. But you're right, maybe we need to examine all of the different levels. How do we change this on-ramp?
So I don't disagree with what you're saying at all. But I think there are ways that people get engaged in what you could be described as sort of very narrow tasks that anchor a lot of other thoughts and communications. The actual process of collecting data and dealing with data takes it from the realm of an authoritative pronouncement to the realm of a discussion. Yeah.
Yeah, I can tie it into the previous talk. Birders, one of the reasons why they are so great at this is it's a lifestyle. And a lot of them, it's a way of socializing, traveling, exploring expanding their horizons, and it's personal.
It becomes a passion. I agree. Any other comments? Those are nice comments.
I'd just like to add one comment built on what you're saying, that while it's clearly not hypothesis-driven, this is empowerment-driven. And anything we can do to get citizens thinking along any line scientifically, and it could be that they will begin to generate hypotheses and engage in scientific process, but just to feel that they have a voice and are finding that in communities sometimes, or even in solitary observations, is just such a wonderful thing.
Yeah, I totally don't want to disparage what we're doing with citizen science. I think it's fantastic. I just want to make sure that we have a realistic grasp of how far that actually extends into what we think of as science as a discipline.
Go ahead. Yeah. 5 minutes. Comment?
Yeah, I think I was going to follow up along the same lines, but early science, if you go back to, in Western cultures, the 1600s, scientists were observers. I mean, they were writing their observations. Sometimes they were doing some fairly, what we would consider rudimentary experiments, but they started out by observing, and that science grew out
For several thousand years. I mean, you go back to the Greeks in observation and then, trying to explain what they see.
Yeah. Let's focus here. Let's focus here. And so Data One has this goal of trying to make data available to people. The idea is that data is often siloed and you can't get at it. So we know enough about informatics now, and we have enough tools that we should be able to change that. So they convinced NSF to give them $15 million, and they had two parts to it. They had a software part, a team of software guys who are making tools, and then they had a community of people. There were 15 working groups, and the communities were kind of different because they brought together very different points of view on these working groups that I think made it a much richer experience. I think it was a very smart move, and they were challenged by NSF, but they did it anyway. Out of that came, first of all, this data life cycle idea, which you folks have seen before in different versions. This is just the Data One version of it that appealed to scientists and librarians alike. And it's given as a cycle. You can argue different points of view about that. But the most important thing I can say to you about this is that scientists are interested in just a little bit of this. They're not interested in the whole thing. They're interested in analyzing data, interested in planning, collecting, maybe integration a little bit. Assuring, describing, preserving, discovering, that's not what they do. But that's what librarians do, right? Without librarians, you can't have this, or that knowledge of wanting to assure, describe, preserve, and discover. And we could spend hours and hours talking about each of these steps because you think about that workflow and process all the time. But the point is that scientists seem to ignore the importance of this, right? And that's why you're our silent partner. And now you're moving away from traditional books and journals, and you're moving to data, which is really important. My dream is that the scientific community recognizes the importance of these roles, and they finally acknowledge the fundamental role that librarians, data managers, those kinds of people play in actually driving science. Because if you can't bring this stuff around now and reuse it, you're not being very smart. And that's what we're trying to do now. And it's been around for 10 or 15 years. People have been talking about it. But a big change in my life was when NSF required that I have a data management plan. And the first plans they wrote were pretty pathetic, because I knew what a good plan should be. I knew what all the issues were. They were pathetic. And I thought about it and I said, well, you know, they're just playing the old cultural trick. They're going to let these guys write pathetic plans, and then the scientists are going to say, well, that's a pathetic plan. And then the guy's going to have to write a better plan. And eventually they're going to get better. And eventually they're going to know that they can't do it all by themselves. And eventually they're going to come to the librarians. And in fact, we know, you probably know how far advanced the UC system is, right? The UC system has a lot of tools. But if you ask somebody, where do you get a digital identifier, unique digital identifier? Oh, I don't know. I'm just a biologist, right? But librarians know that. And when will the culture be in science that we can actually cite data and get credit for it? Well, it's coming. It's important, right? Writing papers is important, but producing good data is important too. People are going to use that data. So that culture is changing. And all these steps can be quite complicated. And I had an example. I had a PowerPoint glitch. That's why I ran out earlier. I was going to show you one little citizen science effort where we were trying to talk about the steps to assure data quality and how complicated it was. But then I realized you guys know how complicated this is. This is just the global view. There are many, many steps and technologies and grant proposals that are written about just parts of these steps. But the most important message for me is that scientists are interested in a little bit, and librarians are interested in the complementary bit. They're the community-oriented people. They want to help people. They want to share. Scientists are, I want to get my data, publish my paper. So it's that, and of course people encompass both those mindsets, but it's taking both those perspectives that will eventually preserve data and allow us to do much better science and free us from these silos we exist in now. Done. I'm done. I'm done. I'll show you this. Happy to answer questions. Yes.
So you have a lot of things on this slide, and it's such a good tool for teaching about observation and collection. Do you work with like the area schools at all, like for partnerships?
Yes, I have. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I've taught elementary school teachers quite a bit. Yeah. Anybody here have a teenager? When you get to the teenage stage, you become the walking wallet, right? Or the keys. You know, you kind of lose your impact. Now, high school teachers are really good at engaging them. I'm not. Elementary school kids I have more luck with, and I think you can start that young. I think you can really make great progress at that age. Building habits early is really good. Question or comment? Yeah.
It just comes to my mind that one challenge is getting girls to
STEM pipeline is very hard to maintain, isn't it? What I see in college now is that women are taking over. They're so much better prepared. They're so much more willing to manage tasks. And last semester in a biology class about physiology, there were 30 students. The top 5 grades were all women. No guy got an A. They didn't. So there's a lot more women coming through the pipeline than there used to be. But one of the things you find if you go to an elementary school, it's rare that an elementary school teacher likes science. You know, usually they like one thing, like reading or writing or something. Some in Boston school systems, they have science specialists there. They are passionate about it. But modeling a passion for something makes it okay for people. So one of my colleagues in this effort, in fact my partner has done for a long time, is she's had people at the beginning of school to draw a picture of a scientist, right? And if you, has anybody ever seen that? You draw a lab coat, right? So she, by the end of the school year, she still has them engaged. One of the most clever tricks I've ever seen is at Thanksgiving, she has them bury a pumpkin, right? So bury a pumpkin. And you have to produce a hypothesis. What's the pumpkin going to look like, right? What's the most important aspect of the ecosystem? Degradation, of course, right? Or else we'd be swamped with junk we didn't want. So we tend to ignore that, but degradation is very important, right? So they have to predict. And then she doesn't say anything about it. Nothing. Not a word. Come the last week of school. What about the pumpkin? Oh, we'll get to it. They're waiting. They want to know. So it's very, very important if you have the ideas that you can do that. You can engage them. And so the last days, and they're just thrilled to see what happened. And it's not what they expected, right? So they remember that. Or another thing she does, which I think is brilliant, is she has them measure ferns. Now that sounds like a pretty simple thing, right? So if you take your kids outside and the principal comes out, what are you doing? You're just having fun outside. No, no, no. I'm supposed to teach measurement. They actually know what a millimeter and a centimeter and a meter is now, right? And these ferns grow and grow and grow, and pretty soon they're taller than the second graders. And then they play hide and seek. They remember that forever. They remember that 20 years later. They had so much fun. And they also know what a meter is. She accomplished both tasks. They had fun and remember what a meter is. Yes, sir.
I just want to mention one other area of citizen science is something called community-based participatory research. And community-based participatory research is when the study subject becomes the study director, or they become actually part of the study. An example, a colleague in San Francisco who was studying wages of chefs in migrant or immigrant Chinese workers in restaurants in San Francisco. And what happened was, as a result of studying these chefs who were making below minimum wage, they became engaged as they became active participants in directing the study, and became empowered to the point where they actually were able to wage a battle in the city hall to get minimum wage, and actually were able to find a voice in the science in their conversation, so they could actually become empowered citizens in that conversation. So it's one of the more inspiring aspects of citizen science is to actually have the subjects become the directors of the study.
And one of the taxonomies of citizen science talks about whether it's a collaboration, whether it's generated by the citizens or whether it's generated by the scientists. So there's stuff written and there's lots of other nice examples in which the citizens sort of take control, or the citizens want something and they get the scientists to help them do it.